You know, some names just echo through history, and they're whispered with this mix of awe and, well, contempt. But I don't think any carry the same chilling weight as this one. It's a name that's become a synonym for the dark arts of politics, for cunning, for the cold, hard math of power. So let's dive into the story of the man who unmasked the world, and in doing so became a myth himself, Niccolò Machiavelli. I mean, really, what kind of person writes a sentence like that? It just cuts against every moral teaching, every ideal of the time. To really get a grip on the man who wrote this, we have to go to the world that made him. A world of absolutely breathtaking beauty and, at the same time, unimaginable cruelty. So let's set the scene. We're in Renaissance Florence. I'm talking about the city of Michelangelo and Leonardo da Vinci. It was the cradle of a new world, just bursting with art and new ideas. But look, underneath that shiny gilded surface, it was a total viper's nest of political intrigue. A place where powerful families, foreign kings, and warrior popes were locked in a constant struggle for control. Fortunes and lives were won and lost in the blink of an eye. And right in the middle of all this chaos, Niccolò Machiavelli is born. His family had a good name, but they were broke, and they were barred from public office because of his father's debts. So you have this brilliant young guy forced to be an outsider, just watching from the sidelines as power shifts like sand. He saw the city's famous rulers, the Medici, get kicked out. He saw a French king just march through Italy like he owned the place. And into that void, a totally new kind of leader stepped up. A charismatic, fire and brimstone priest named Girolamo Savonarola. This guy preached that all the city's beauty was a sin, that its art was idol worship, its knowledge just vanity. And people bought it. Under his spell, the citizens of Florence threw their own books, their own paintings, their own musical instruments into these massive fires. And you can just imagine a young Machiavelli watching this wave of fanaticism sweep through his city, even quietly making fun of the priest's sermons in his own writings. He was learning his first big lesson. Faith, well, it can be a weapon. But here's the thing about that kind of fire and brimstone. It burns out fast. When Savonarola's political predictions didn't pan out and his powerful friends abandoned him, the very same people who had worshipped him turned on him. He was arrested, tortured, and hanged, and his body was burned in the exact same square where his bonfires of the vanities once raged. And just like that, Florence was adrift again, leaderless and totally desperate for a new government. So, if you're an ambitious young man with a sharp mind, and this is key, no ties to the old regimes of either the Medici or Savonarola, this was the perfect moment. The very thing that held him back, his lack of political connections, suddenly became his greatest asset. He was a complete blank slate. And just like that, at only 29 years old, Niccolò Machiavelli was appointed Second Chancellor of the new Florentine Republic. This was a major position, and it threw him right into the heart of the city's diplomacy and defense. After a whole lifetime of just watching, his real-world political career had officially begun. And he wasn't just pushing paper in some cozy office. Oh no, he was sent on mission after mission into this world of constantly shifting alliances. He learned that mercenary captains would betray you in a heartbeat for a better offer. He went toe-to-toe with absolutely ruthless rulers like Caterina Sforza, the Tigress of Forli. He was out there, in the diplomatic trenches, learning firsthand that in politics promises are temporary, being good is a weakness, and survival is the only thing that actually matters. But out of all the powerful people he met, one man would leave a deeper, darker mark on him than anyone else. This was the man who would become the terrifying model for a whole new kind of ruler. His name was Cesare Borgia, and yeah, he was the illegitimate son of Pope Alexander VI. Borgia was everything the Florentine Republic was not. He was decisive, he was ruthless, and he was brutally effective. He moved with the speed of a striking snake. Machiavelli was sent to be an envoy, to observe him, and what he saw both absolutely horrified and fascinated him. You see, Borgia had this method. It was genius in a terrifying kind of way. Machiavelli called it well-used cruelty. So when his own commanders rebelled against him, Borgia didn't panic. Nope, he pretended to make up with them, invited them to a big feast to celebrate, and once they were all unarmed and relaxed, his men seized them. By morning, they were all strangled. Machiavelli watched this masterclass in betrayal and took detailed notes. He saw that Borgia didn't use violence randomly. He used it like a surgeon's scalpel to get exactly what he wanted. Now, armed with all these brutal lessons, Machiavelli gets his own big win. He had been arguing against using untrustworthy mercenaries for years, so he creates a citizen militia, a totally revolutionary idea at the time, and with it, he finally reconquers the rebellious city of Pisa after a 15-year war. He had proven his theories worked on the battlefield. This was the absolute high point of his political career. But you know how it goes in Renaissance Italy. The wheel of fortune turns. And it turns fast. The very foundation of Machiavelli's world, the alliances he had so carefully managed, were about to completely shatter. It all fell apart so fast. The new pope, a rival of the Borgias, turned on Florence's main ally, France. There was this brief moment of hope when the French won a battle, but then they were totally driven out of Italy. And suddenly, the Florentine Republic, which had bet everything on France, was left completely exposed to the Pope and his Spanish allies. The citizen militia Machiavelli had built was just no match for a professional army. The Pope's army marched on Florence, and their demand was simple: get rid of the Republic and bring back the Medici family. The government just collapsed. The Medici, who had been in exile for almost 20 years, just walked right back into the city as its new masters. For Machiavelli, the fall was brutal, and it was fast. First, he was dismissed from the post he had held for 14 years. Then, his name was found on some list of conspirators. He was arrested, accused of treason against the new Medici rulers, and he was tortured. They used the strappato, where they tie your hands behind your back, hoist you up by your wrists, and dislocate your shoulders. He went through it 6 times and never confessed because he hadn't done anything. He was eventually released, but he was a broken man. He was banished from Florence, forbidden to even set foot in the city he had spent his life serving. He had to retreat to his little family farm, basically a political ghost, haunted by his old life, a man of action with absolutely nothing to do. So what do? What does a man of action do when the one thing you've ever known, the only thing you're good at, is just ripped away from you? When the world you mastered suddenly decides it doesn't want you anymore? He writes. Every night, he'd take off his muddy farm clothes and put on his old formal robes, the clothes he wore in his old office. He would go into his study to talk with the great thinkers of the past. And out of all that despair, he poured every single lesson he had ever learned about power, war, and human nature into one small book. This wasn't some philosophical theory. It was a desperate, brilliant, and very dangerous job application. He called it The Prince. And this book, it was a bombshell. Totally revolutionary. For centuries, everyone from Plato to the church had said that a good ruler has to be a good man, moral, just, generous. Machiavelli just tossed that whole idea into the fire. He said, look, in the real world, a prince who tries to be good all the time is going to be destroyed by all the people who aren't. So a ruler has to learn how not to be good and when to use that knowledge. And this, of course, leads to his most infamous argument. Is it better to be loved or feared? His answer? Ideally, both. But if you have to pick one, it's not even a question. Choose fear. Why? Because love is fickle. It relies on other people's gratitude. And people, as he pointed out, are pretty selfish. They'll break that bond of love whenever it's convenient. But fear is held in place by the dread of punishment. And that's something a ruler can control. It's not about being a monster. It's about having a tool that you know will work. And if you read between the lines of all this brutal advice, you can see the real game he's playing. He's holding up a mirror to the new Medici rulers, showing them the world as it really is. And in that reflection, he's subtly pointing out the solution, the one indispensable tool that any prince needs to succeed, an experienced, practical advisor who really gets how power works. Someone, exactly like Niccolò Machiavelli. So Machiavelli dedicates this masterpiece to Lorenzo de' Medici, the new guy in charge. He presents his life's work, a survival guide for politics. And the story goes that on the exact same day, Lorenzo also got a gift of some hunting dogs. He apparently glanced at the book and then spent the rest of his time admiring the dogs. The ultimate Hail Mary pass had failed. The rejection was humiliating, and it was total. So, with his political career officially dead in the water, Machiavelli turned completely to writing. He'd never again hold the kind of power he once had. But the ideas he'd unleashed in that little book, well, they were about to take on a life of their own long after he was gone. And he wasn't just the guy who wrote The Prince. In another book, his Discourses on Livy, he wrote with incredible passion about republics, arguing that the greatest states are the ones where citizens are free. It's such a fascinating contrast to the advice in The Prince. It shows you a guy who believed in liberty, but also understood the brutal realities of power. And then, in a final incredible twist of irony, the Medici actually hired him to write a history of Florence.
But fate had one last cruel joke to play on him. In 1527, the Medici were overthrown again, and the republic he loved and served was restored. Machiavelli rushed back to Florence, hoping to finally get his old job back. But they turned him down. His work for the Medici had made him look like an enemy of the people to the new government.
That disappointment was just too much for him. His health, which was already failing, just gave out. A few weeks after that final rejection, Niccolò Machiavelli died. A man who had served two different governments, but, in the end, was trusted by neither of them. After he died, The Prince was published, and it just exploded across Europe. The church condemned it. It was branded a handbook for tyrants, and his name was twisted into an insult, an adjective for everything evil and deceitful in politics, Machiavellian. He created a legacy of infamy he never even lived to see. And that leaves us with the big question that's been hanging over his name for 500 years. Was Machiavelli really a teacher of evil, just whispering poison in the ears of tyrants? Or was he something else entirely? A political realist, maybe the very first political scientist, who just had the guts to describe power not as we wish it was, but as it actually is. That's the shadow he cast. And you know what? We're all still living in it.